Welcome to a Psychodelicious conversation on mental health issues and trends from two local mental health professionals in the greater Lansing area. I'm Michael Stratton, LMSW.
And I'm Morgan Bowen, DNP, PMHNP, and we're here to provide you with a deep dive into the human experience of consciousness and beyond. Our aim is to be educational and entertaining, so just kick back and open your ears and your minds.
Hey, this is Mike Stratton.
And I'm Morgan Bowen.
And we are here post-holidays, which who knows when you're going to hear this, but we're here in our time machine just a week after New Year's Eve.
Happy New Year.
New Year, yeah.
2025.
So we were talking all things celebratory before we opened things up. However, that's not our topic today.
We'll give you the other stuff.
What are we talking about today, Michael?
I believe you made the suggestion.
I did, actually. Yes,
that we talk about schizophrenia.
I did. We haven't talked about it. And over the break, I had some time, so I caught up on my Netflix watching. So I watched a documentary called, I think it was called Six Schizophrenic Brothers. And it's on Netflix. It's a 4-part series of a family in Colorado with 12 children. They were an Irish Catholic family, similar to one of the guests or one of the speakers here. I don't know about
my
you.
wife's family. Mm-hmm. Well, she only had half a dozen.
Somewhere in the Wandering for mine.
But 6 out of the 12 children had schizophrenia, which is that's a huge amount of.
That's a lot of schizophrenia.
Yeah,
in one family. Yeah.
So it got me thinking about schizophrenia, which we haven't talked about. So figured that would be a good topic for us. And it's in the realm of, serious mental illness or SMI. So if you work in the field, it's kind of a specific I don't want to call it a subset, but typically people who work in the field, who work with SMI or serious mental illness, including schizophrenia, are a bit different than, what you and I do in the outpatient private practice world. Although sometimes there's some crossover.
Although, both of us had experience working with a number of schizophrenics when we were working at the hospital. Yeah. Inpatient and then also adult day treatment, where I worked for a couple of years. Didn't you? I mean, you were a psych tech. What years were you? Do we want to say specific years?
We can. I don't mind.
How many years? Let's put it that way.
Let's see. So it was before I became a nurse. It was while I was going to nursing school. So I did it for, I think, about 3 years total. And it was in the 2010 range, in the early 2010s.
Yeah. So I was like 30 years before you.
Yeah. You were
and I was there for just over 2 years. Mm-hmm. And then I was in day treatment for like another 2.5 years. So I was over there a total of 5 years.
So what was the day treatment through St. Lawrence? Or?
Yep. Yeah. And so it was, and it was a lot of schizophrenics who had passed through there. When we saw them inpatient, which I'm sure you did too, you would see people who were what they call floridly psychotic. They were having the symptoms of schizophrenia upon admission.
That is such an old phrase.
Yeah,
I love that phrase.
Floridly psychotic.
Floridly, yes. When I first read that in like a doctor's note or in charting, I just thought it was kind of a beautiful way to describe
what do they say now?
A very ill person. Gosh, I don't, exhibiting, psychotic symptoms, exhibiting severe psychosis, delusional, it's hallucinations, hallucinating, kind of more of the specifics. I would think maybe floridly psychotic is a little too general for today's charting.
Yeah, I would think so too.
From a layman's term, I can't actually say that I've ever met or that I knowingly met somebody with schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. So my familiarity is pretty much movies, and I was kind of looking over at like A Beautiful Mind. Is that like Did you see it?
He was psychotic.
Would you say that's a good portrayal, like a reflective of what it's like?
Well, so all right, so and we should kind of define some things and talk about it. So A Beautiful
That's
Mind,
where I'm going.
and actually there is a like a controversy, a discussion about what was his name? John Nash, Stephen Nash. It was Nash,
played by Russell Crowe.
Played by Russell Crowe, very very smart. Scientist. What was he? A physicist or nope? Economics.
A mathematician.
Mathematician. There you
John
go.
Forbes Nash.
So a lot of people think that he was actually bipolar with psychosis because he was so high functioning at times, and a lot of times with schizophrenia, people are not so high functioning. Although that's not always true. That is not universally true, but it is an illness that I think most people associate with psychotic phenomenon features, which are hallucinations, so seeing things that people can't see,
and more often hearing, right?
Hearing things.
That's a more common hallucination, like hearing. It's like the radio's on, but there's no radio in the room. Like you're hearing it and wondering why other people aren't hearing it.
When does it usually show up in somebody?
Early, adolescence or early adulthood typically is the onset.
Late adolescence, early adulthood.
And so 17 maybe starting to show some signs, and there is a pre-presentation, like things that happen to somebody before the illness happens. But usually 19, 20 is kind of when it starts to become more apparent.
What would those signs be?
Well, certainly, and a lot of times the person doesn't talk about them because it's very scary, and the person doesn't know exactly what's happening. But they're disorganized thinking, so sometimes not making sense to others, talking about things that are not happening. Maybe people are following them, or they can see somebody outside, or something happens that they're afraid. There's a lot of fear, lots of they don't know what's going on, so they're afraid of something.
So paranoia sounds like the biggest sign.
Yeah, huge sign. Also, there's like behavioral kind of disturbances, maybe walking a lot, pacing, like looking off into the distance, sometimes periods of time where they're very still and just kind of don't appear to be, sort of they're there, but they're not there kind of thing. Things like that. Just bizarre types of things that happen that are out of character for them. That's what I would say. What about you, Mike? What do you remember? What do you see?
What I remember from the hospital when people would show up, and I like that idea of the fear, because I remember there was a psychiatrist who came and gave us an in-service once on schizophrenia, and he said it's the condition of chronic terror, of just being terrified of the world. It's not making sense to them. So the disorganized thinking, there's input that's coming in that doesn't seem to be matching what else is going on. And so the delusional states are a way of trying to make sense of it. I'm hearing voices telling me things. No one else seems to be doing this. So therefore, there must be some kind of a conspiracy going on, probably against me. Maybe it's the government. Maybe it's aliens. Maybe it's monsters. Maybe it's who knows what. But the delusions, the delusional states that kind of explain to them what's happening internally that other people don't seem to be making any sense of from themselves.
Yeah, and a delusion is a little bit different than a hallucination. A delusion is like a belief in something. It's a thought, and frequently an organized way of thinking. So if somebody has a paranoid delusion, maybe they think that the police are out after them, or the FBI or aliens are able to read their thoughts. Those are some kind of common things that you hear with people. There also can be, and very frequently is, a religious component to it, either a delusion or hallucination. Lots of ideas of good and bad and evil, and who's good and who's evil. It's very terrifying to the person. The person is usually incredibly scared, and a lot of the the sort of reactive behaviors that can happen are from fear, or really the person may be thinking that you're after them, and if you're trying to help them, then it can kind of create a situation where they're afraid of their life and may react in a way that reflects that.
So one thing I'm always looking at is continuums. So at the far end is that kind of delusional thinking that's a result of hallucinations, but I think to some extent we all are trying to tell ourselves a story that makes the world make sense to us, and may not be at that point of delusion, but we may be believing things that aren't real. And as time goes on, you come to realize, like, oh my gosh, he really was a crook the whole time, for instance. But do you think that there are different, the word that comes to mind is gradations, or maybe different levels of how badly someone has schizophrenia? Are there mild cases of schizophrenia?
Well, I think it's more, how much it's going to impact quality of life and functioning. So I think some people, because the other components with schizophrenia are, not a lot of interest in relationships, not really, sometimes not a lot of interest in bathing, showering. There tends to be kind of a neglect of grooming that happens, and just kind of not following or not keyed into social norms or societal norms. And so that can cause problems with being able to work, have a job, kind of function in a way that, allows them to integrate into society. Not always. And with treatment, that can be changed. But I think that usually the severity is how much the symptoms or the illness is going to impact that.
Do you think too, some people use the term psychotic break. So there's kind of a gradual onset. A lot of what you were describing is kind of a gradual onset, but then there's also like a real sudden break that someone might experience. I think both of us talked about this in a prior episode, that some people that are prone to this, that have a family history of this, can be triggered by smoking some very strong cannabis, for instance, or some angel dust or something else that can trigger like a psychosis. And people will describe like they were just fine, and then all of a sudden they weren't dealing with the same reality. They were not fine. They were really not fine. Yeah.
So in schizophrenia, it tends to be that more gradual, like you can usually, looking back, identify because not all psychotic illnesses are schizophrenia. There are other versions or presentations that are not so consistent with schizophrenia. That just tends to be the one that is most known. In psychiatry and psychology, that was one of the most interesting things for the early for early psychology, was to really understand the experience of people who were psychotic. So psychiatry has a really rich history of it, or interest in it. We're kind of talking about the presentation and then the quality of life as well. And one thing I would say is that it can be it's just incredibly debilitating, and it happens to somebody when they're young. And so a lot of times they're in school, they're doing really well, things are going, the person has really a bright future, and then they begin to show signs. And that's what really came out in this documentary I was talking about. It was very, very good representation of just how the illness impacts the person, as well as like the entire family and community.
So one after the other was starting to show signs of it. They just, as they reached a certain age, they became...
Yeah, and the thinking is that there is a strong genetic component to it. With so they in other families where there had been multiple cases of the illness in one family have been part of a study, and others, a series of studies to sort of connect the genetics with the disorder.
Have they found, like, is there a schizophrenic gene, or have they been able to narrow that down to that point? Or
I don't know. Yes, and not that I know of. That's the goal. There are genes that are associated with it. They have found genes of interest, I guess I would say, as far as I understand. I'm not an expert in this realm, but
genes of interest.
Genes of interest, because what you look for is genes that show up, especially in a family, repeated genes where only the people with the illness have this gene mutation, and those in the family that don't have the illness don't have that. That's kind of very confirmatory evidence. And so that's why there's so much interest in this particular case. And at least according to the documentary, one particular researcher from Harvard, psychiatrist, I can't remember her name, was able to identify a gene of interest to continue on.
I have to apologize. I've been watching Crunk. Have you seen Crunk?
Yes. Crunk on film.
So she would say, "Would you find these genes in the mall?"
Right. DNA.
No.
Crunk is the name. It's a show?
It's a
Philomena Crunk is her name.
But she goes and she makes those kind of ridiculous, very, very that's her. You just brought her up. There she is.
Is it Kunk?
Kunk.
Sorry,
it's Kunk.
But thank goodness. I thought we were getting all Little John up in this.
Anyway.
Oh, so we
I like Crunk on Earth. Sorry, go ahead.
Do people who are schizophrenic realize they're schizophrenic?
So this is another, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is hugely connected to the success of treatment. So anosognosia is the state of not believing that you are ill. And so there is, people that do experience anosognosia. I always struggle with saying that correctly, and I'm not sure I did it. But if they don't accept, then they don't, they don't take medication. They won't, And so this happens, and that's associated with poor outcomes. So yes, there are people with the illness who absolutely do not believe that they do have the illness, particularly when they are, psychotic or in the, acute stages of the illness, which makes it very difficult to, to work with and to treat.
I'm thinking about a particular individual that I was working with at one point when I was in day treatment. These were people who were generally pretty stabilized, and so they were coming in 2 to 3 times a week and having programming, and I was running a group of some kind. And this person came up to me and said, "I need to talk to you right away." And I said, "What is it?" And they said, "I have just destroyed the universe." And it was kind of shocking to hear someone say that. And I said, "You know what? I was just out in the universe, and things were okay. Things were really okay." And they said, "No, I've done it." I said, "Well, wait until the group is over, and we'll go check it out." And so we walked out onto the street, and I said, "See, everything is here." He said, "It was just beyond this, right behind those houses, everything is gone." And so I said, "Well, let's go do that." Anyway, we did that for a couple of streets or so. And then I realized, like, this was not going to be a matter of logic. It wasn't a matter of reality testing. He was very, very sure that, in fact, that was his delusion, was that he had destroyed the universe. So it was like, you need to get on some medication again and get stabilized and all that kind of stuff. But what a miserable thing to think that you've destroyed the universe,
It's very, very, again, just like there's a heavy burden. There's just a heavy mental burden that comes with, believing that. And a lot of the common things that you will hear, especially with the auditory hallucinations, is people can't really make out what they're. A lot of times the voices are muted. They're not really intelligible. They can make out some words, but not a lot. It's almost always negative commentary on the person. They're ugly. They're not good enough. They're never going to do anything. They're evil. Their thoughts are bad. Things that are really just very, and the person is, can be very ashamed, and it's a very torturous space to be in.
So they'd be pretty high risk for self-harm, or for suicide.
Yes.
Those kinds of things.
Much higher risk for suicide than they are for hurting other people. And that's very consistent in the epidemiology of the illness, is that there is a much higher rate than the non-ill population for hurting themselves or killing themselves, suicide.
Yeah. When I worked at the hospital, when I was working on the inpatient, they had an inpatient and then they had a locked unit where people that were actively psychotic, they'd put them back there because they were more likely to be harmful to themselves or someone else, and they had more hands-on supervision, someone watching them all the time. And it was a smaller unit. I think there were six rooms maybe back there, but then they also had an isolation room where sometimes people were actually needed to be, whether they needed it or not, sometimes they were restrained, actually used to tie to a bed that would keep them from harming themselves or harming someone else. That didn't happen very often, but it did happen occasionally. And I always felt like, oh my God, this is like cuckoo's nest. It's just, I don't know to what extent that still happens.
It's much lower, and those things are tracked now. Those are huge markers of that are tracked by, Medicare and Medicare services, CMS, to kind of indicate the quality of treatment for somebody who's inpatient. So it's something that the hospital's inpatient units track, and it is monitored pretty. It's a heavily monitored.
That's good.
And so, the goal is to reduce that to as low as possible. And there's benchmarks that people work with, and so it certainly happens in very extreme cases, but it's after a whole lot of other stuff has been tried to kind of mitigate the situation without having to do that.
Yeah, I would think that staffing. I mean, if you could put someone in a one-on-one situation with somebody to help them de-escalate and do a little reality testing, or helping them just to relax, just to relax and to breathe with somebody, that kind of thing might be
well. And I think
useful.
another important is these are members of our families and communities, and so they people live with the illness and are in our area, and we have social networks to to help and to attempt to just to aid those in our community. And so you and I have talked about St. Lawrence. That is historically the psychiatric hospital in Lansing area.
We're gonna get sued now.
Oh, why do you say that?
No, that's where we worked. Yes.
Yes. Well, St. Lawrence was a standalone.
There's
hospital.
A lot of stories.
Sounds like
trying not to tell.
Sounds like some paranoia going on there. I'm just saying.
Yep.
They've been watching me.
They have. St. Lawrence has been, was an independent hospital. Currently, it's part of Sparrow Hospital, which is now part of University of Michigan or Michigan Medicine. But St. Lawrence, up until the 90s, was their own hospital. It was separate than Sparrow.
Right.
And it was the place for behavioral health. That was like the behavioral health services place for both inpatient day programs. I think they had a lot of just outpatient.
And they also had outpatient as well. Yeah. So they had outpatient, partial hospitalization, and then the inpatient. And they had a whole floor that was all psych, and then the floor above was for substance use. And when we were in day treatment, when I worked in day treatment, we had some epic volleyball battles against the people that were in the substance abuse unit, and we would beat them. We were very proud of our status. I thought I was good at volleyball until I went out and played with people that weren't highly medicated.
Well, and it brings up, when you're in a community like ours, which is, not small, but it's not humongous. It's not, like a metro Chicago or whatever. So, the people that work in psych, kind of tend to know each other. And then a lot of times people with serious mental illness are connected with the people that work with them, so it's kind of its own little community in a way, and so I liked that about working at the hospital, is you get to know people, you see them out of the hospital, you see them, and and
you would see people on a pretty regular, semi-regular basis, at least at one time when I was working there. It wasn't unusual for someone to check into the hospital and be there for weeks and sometimes months, and the insurance would pay for it. You don't see that anymore.
No.
That's pretty rare. But you'd often see the same people coming back after a series of months or year after year to get stabilized. And that, again, not something you probably see as much anymore as you used to.
No, there's a lot of different programs. And the other piece of this is community mental health. So
Right.
community mental health is a huge network of programming and workers that is county by county. And the money is dispersed through the federal government and then also through the state government to help and assist with the care of persons who need, a lot of care, which is, people who are severely mentally ill.
But they don't have anything on site. Do they have something on site?
They do. Over on Jolly in Pennsylvania is the main.
I mean, a place where they can go in and.
They have what's called a crisis stabilization unit.
Okay.
And so for people who are in crisis, they can go there. If it's something that is more acute or needs more intervention, then a lot of times they will be brought to the hospital from the stabilization unit. But they do have a place for people to present if they're having like problems.
Interesting.
And then they also, they do have offices and programs that are there. Although I'm pretty sure, but they also have other like buildings throughout the community for like geriatric services, like Tri-County Office on Aging is through CMH. I'm not exactly sure where that is, but that's a huge, is that through CMH? It's connected with CMH for people with, aging related psychiatric issues, dementia, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a network of services that's pretty vast. So a lot of persons with serious mental illness are connected through them. And then I guess I would also say NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, has a very strong chapter in Lansing for both persons with mental illness as well as family members, because it really is a family illness, because people frequently are, they remain connected with their families, and ideally their families can be involved in their life and in their care.
Hopefully.
But sometimes that's not available, but just depending.
And that'll carry over into part 2 of this program, which will be treatment. A Psychodelicious conversation is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is no substitute for therapy and should not be treated as such. If you feel a need for real therapy, you should consult your local provider, Google therapy or therapists in your area, check with community mental health or a suicide hotline if you are feeling suicidal.
Mike and Morgan welcome your questions, feedback, or dilemmas. Feel free to send us an email at a psychodeliciousconversation@gmail.com. That is a Psychodelicious, PSYCHODELICIOUS conversation@gmail.com.
The views expressed on this podcast are solely the opinions of Mike Stratton and Morgan Bowen, and do not reflect the views or opinions of any site broadcasting this podcast. Replication of this podcast without written permission is strictly prohibited.